What in the heck have I done to the van now? Welcome to the Hippie Geeks. If you enjoy this video, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to catch all our new content. As the kids are getting older and either moving out or moving on to doing things more independently, our life has also changed and shifted. Our camping trips this summer are pretty much going to be Lindsay, Sam, Noah, and myself, and as such, the way we camp is also going to change. One thing we have decided to do is build a deck on top of the van. This will allow the four of us to camp in a very self-contained space, with the boys sleeping in the back of the van, while Lindsay and I sleep in a tent on top of the van. But James, you say, why not just use one of those awesome car top campers that are so awesome and self-contained? Because we are poor, I would answer, and I do not have the $1,500 laying around to spend on such a thing. What I can do, however, is build something that will give us a very similar experience that will cost us considerably less and be almost as cool. As with any of our projects, this one started out with several sketches. I originally wanted to build this using Superstrut, however when I priced everything out, it came to a little over $400, so I went back to the drawing board. Now, when I design things, I have a tendency to over-engineer them. Would a steel framework be stronger than a wooden one? Yeah, it probably would. However, I am pretty sure that I can make something nearly as strong, considerably lighter, and considerably less expensive out of wood. I did some quick measurements on the van, checking out the spacing of the factory rails, and decided on the design and headed back to Lowe's to pick up some lumber. We walked out of there with a total bill of $115, including all the lumber, 2 sheets of plywood, a pile of connecting hardware, and 3 boxes of screws. I am not going to list out everything exactly, as this process is going to be different depending on what vehicle or rack system you would want to put it on top of, but the important part is to have the crossbars underneath the deck hit pretty close to the support points on the rack, which will give you the maximum amount of support. I started out by laying our plywood pieces across our picnic table as a work surface. I had them cut to length at Lowe's, which usually works out pretty well for me. This time, however, the saw was not set up straight. I couldn't tell at the time, and would not discover it until much later in the process, but where the cuts started there the 75 inches I had asked for, however by the bottom of the board they are nearly 76 inches wide. I got lucky this time, as the plywood boards will just have to get trimmed to fit. If the angle had gone the other way, however, the plywood would have been too narrow, and I would have had to take them back and get them replaced. They will replace them free of charge if they mess up a cut like that. I just hate seeing good wood go to waste when that happens. If you do have the store cut your boards, measure them immediately so that you can catch something like this before you ever leave the store. Around the outside of the rack, we went with 2x4 lumber, using 2 8-foot long pieces on the outer edges and 2 6-foot pieces connecting them. This will give our deck an overall size of 6'3" by 8'0", which will be perfect for our needs. After clamping the 2x4s in place on the plywood to make sure they stayed straight, I pre-drilled holes for 2 4-inch screws in each corner, connecting the 2x4s together. Once all 4 corners were connected from the outside, I used a metal corner angle to connect them on the inside using 4 1 5/8 long deck screws. After that, it was time to start getting the cross members installed. Our cross members are all 2x3s, though we had to rip the center one down 3/8 of an inch due to the curve of the rails. The first one is going to be 8 inches from the back of the deck, and this one will sit over the rear attachment points of the roof rails. 8 inches is as far back as this deck will be able to hang without interfering with our rear hatch, while minimizing the amount we are going to have cantilevered over the front. I am using 2x4 joist hangers to connect the cross ribs to the outer 2x4s, and once those are attached, we will also be sinking a 4-inch deck screw in from the outside just to make this as secure as possible. Once the rear crossbar was attached, I moved on to the front crossbar. This one is 48 inches in front of the last crossbar, which is 54 inches from the back of the deck. This will line up over the front mounting point, and I attached it the same way with both hangers and 4-inch screws from the outside. After that, I measured the midpoint between the front and rear supports, and this is where the 2x3 that we had ripped down earlier goes and will sit over the middle support point on the rail. It is attached in the same way with hangers and deck screws from the outside. Also at this point, I secured a 2x2 from the outside with deck screws at the midpoint of the deck, 48 inches from each end. This isn't a support, it is just the point where the two sheets of plywood meet, and this will allow them to be supported along this edge. Next up is the last crossbeam. This one will not be supported from underneath but will cantilever over the roof of the van in front of the rails. This one we placed between the front of the deck and the front crossmember and attached it the same way as well with hangers and deck screws. After that, it was time to put the framework on top of the van and see if all my measurements were correct and if it would actually fit the way that I thought it would. Surprisingly, it was an exact fit. After centering it on the supports, it looks like it's going to hit all the rail attachment points. It doesn't interfere with the rear door, and it doesn't stick out too far over the front. With that out of the way, it is time to get the plywood attached to the top. This is the point when I noticed that Lowe's had messed up the cuts I had had them do. Luckily, it still worked out, and once I figured out that I would just need to cut them to fit later, I moved on to attaching the 3/4 inch plywood decking to all of the supports underneath it. Using 2 large pieces of thick plywood gives the entire structure a lot of strength and rigidity without adding a lot of weight, and by connecting them to each of the cross beams, it ties the whole structure together. We are pre-drilling all of these holes as well. We wanted to make sure that the plywood did not split or splinter, especially along these edges. We put in screws every 6 inches, which should be plenty to keep everything held together. We also put in a few 4-inch screws along the edges just to make sure that this thing doesn't come apart at freeway speeds. Once the deck was completely attached, we used a couple of different tools to get the crooked edges straightened up. It is not as pretty as it could be, but in the future we are actually going to face the entire deck with cedar boards that will cover up the edges of the plywood and the 2x4s, which will hide all of this anyways. At this point my battery died, but I pushed ahead with finishing it up and getting it on the van. It is still light enough that I can move it myself, but it is unwieldy. To connect the deck to the roof rails, I used a U-bolt on each attachment point, coming up from the bottom under the rail, up through the cross beams, and then into the plywood. I countersunk the holes in the plywood down to the crossbeam top, that way I could fit a washer and nut onto the U-bolt and they wouldn't stick up through the plywood, leaving us with a flat surface to set up a tent or just hang out. I still need to figure out what kind of ladder system I am going to build so that we can get up in there, but for now I will just use our existing ladder, which will get us by until we make a decision and get it built. If this is your first time here on the Hippie Geeks, it would be wonderful to have you subscribe. This channel is all about helping you visualize, learn, and create. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and check out our Patreon page or merch store to support the channel directly. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next one.